And here comes Brutus with the garden hose right on schedule, Diane muttered, watching through her kitchen window as the massive German Shepherd dragged 60 feet of industrial rubber hose across the pristine lawn next door. The dog's mud-caked paws left perfect prints across Karen Whittington's imported Italian marble patio tiles, heading straight for the elaborate garden party in full swing. 3 seconds later, the screams began. Diane didn't move to stop it. Instead, she poured herself another glass of iced tea and leaned against the counter, savoring the chaos unfolding at the Whittington estate. Champagne flutes toppled. White linen tablecloths were yanked to the ground. A chocolate fountain became a projectile weapon. And through it all, Brutus happily sprinted around the yard with his beloved hose, oblivious to the destruction in his wake. This wasn't how Diane had planned to spend her Saturday, but it was undeniably satisfying after 6 months of Karen's relentless AHOA tyranny. It had started innocently enough when Diane purchased the 5-acre plot adjacent to the Whittingtons' mansion. The sprawling ranch had been her dream, a place where her 3 rescue dogs could roam freely, where she could grow her own vegetables, and most importantly, where she could escape the suffocating rules of suburban living. Or so she thought. What the realtor had conveniently failed to mention was that despite being miles from the nearest housing development, her property fell under the jurisdiction of the Hillcrest Valley Homeowners Association, an organization that Karen Whittington ruled with an iron fist and a designer clipboard. Your fence is 3 inches higher than regulation. Karen had informed Diane during their first meeting, her voice as sharp as her platinum bob. And that shade of brown isn't on our approved color palette. Diane had tried reasoning. It's a working ranch. The height keeps predators out and livestock in. Rules are rules, Karen had replied with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. You'll receive the violation notice tomorrow. The fines accrue daily. That was just the beginning. Over the following months, Karen cited Diane for everything from excessive agricultural activity to unauthorized canine occupancy. Apparently, the HOA had a 2-pet maximum. The fines piled up, and Diane's attempts to appeal at the monthly HOA meetings were consistently blocked by Karen's parliamentary maneuvering. Motion to table discussion of the Martinez property until next meeting, Karen would announce, never looking up from her agenda. All in favor? The board of Karen's friends would dutifully raise their hands. But the final straw came yesterday when Diane returned from a supply run to find Karen's garden party setup crew had commandeered her property. Tables, chairs, portable bars, and a dance floor covered the eastern acre of Diane's land, without permission, without notice. "Oh, didn't you get my email?" Karen had asked innocently when confronted. "We always use this space for the spring soiree. Previous owners understood the importance of community events. Get your things off my land," Diane had demanded. Karen's smile turned glacial. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The party's tomorrow, and the HOA bylaws, Section 12B, clearly state that community functions take precedence over individual property rights during designated social events." Diane had checked. No such bylaw existed. So today, as Karen's garden party reached its pinnacle with the HOA president herself making a champagne toast to neighborhood harmony, Diane had simply opened her back gate. 6 years earlier, Karen Whittington had been plain Karen Miller, a middle manager at a failing insurance company with mounting credit card debt and a leaking apartment. Then she met Harold Whittington at a corporate retreat. 25 years for senior, recently divorced, and the owner of a successful commercial real estate empire. Their whirlwind romance surprised everyone, especially Harold's adult children, who watched in horror as their father's signature appeared on marriage documents after just 3 months of dating. Karen moved into Harold's mansion in Hillcrest Valley, and suddenly she had everything she ever wanted: wealth, status, and power. The Hillcrest Valley HOA became her kingdom. "I'm just offering my organizational skills to the community," she told Harold when she first ran for board president. "Someone needs to maintain standards." Harold had nodded absently, already buried in his work phone. He never noticed how his wife's eyes gleamed when she received that first HOA rulebook, or how quickly she began expanding it. Under Karen's leadership, the once thin pamphlet of community guidelines ballooned into a 347-page manifesto governing everything from mailbox dimensions to the acceptable duration one could leave garage doors open no more than 7 minutes. Violations were meticulously documented with her military-grade camera, and fines were issued with algorithmic precision. "You don't understand, Harold," she'd explained during their increasingly rare dinners together. "Property values are directly tied to aesthetic conformity. I'm protecting our investment." The community's reaction was mixed. Older residents resented the new restrictions but couldn't match Karen's parliamentary knowledge. Newer residents, mostly young professionals who viewed their homes as investments rather than living spaces, appreciated the rising property values that Karen proudly announced at each HOA meeting. No one dared challenge her directly, Those who tried found themselves buried in violation notices or worse, subject to Karen's social exclusion campaigns. "Did you hear about the Johnsons?" she would whisper at her legendary garden parties. They wanted to paint their shutters navy blue instead of Hillcrest blue number 427. Can you imagine? Next thing you know, people will be parking RVs in their driveways. The whispers would spread, and soon the offending homeowners would find themselves uninvited from community events, their children mysteriously excluded from playdates. Most eventually capitulated or moved away. Karen's power reached its apex when she successfully lobbied to expand the HOA's jurisdiction to include the surrounding acreage, land that had never been part of the original development. She argued that visual continuity required controlling what happened on properties visible from Hillcrest Valley homes. The vote passed by a narrow margin, with most opposition coming from owners of those outlying properties who suddenly found themselves subject to rules they'd never agreed to. "It's perfectly legal," Karen assured the board, waving a document prepared by the HOA's attorney, who happened to be Harold's nephew. "The county commissioners have approved our boundary extension." What she didn't mention was the series of private lunches she had with those commissioners, or the significant donations Harold's company had made to their re-election campaigns. By the time Diane Martinez purchased the adjacent ranch, Karen's control of Hillcrest Valley was absolute. The board rubber-stamped her decisions. Her network of concerned neighbors reported violations before Karen even needed to look for them. And Harold, increasingly distant as he expanded his business overseas, simply signed the checks that funded Karen's legal maneuvers. "The Martinez property is a problem," Karen announced at an emergency board meeting the day after Diane moved in. "Those animals, that awful barnyard aesthetic, it threatens everything we've built." "But she's outside the development," one brave board member pointed out. Karen's smile didn't waver. "Not anymore. She's under our jurisdiction now, and she'll learn to comply. They all do eventually." But unlike her previous opponents, Diane Martinez wasn't going to sell or surrender. And she got allies that Karen hadn't accounted for. Allies with 4 legs, powerful jaws, and absolutely no respect for HOA regulations. Brutus led the charge, garden hose flailing behind him like a conquering general's banner. Following close behind came Apollo, a Rottweiler-Mastiff mix whose massive paws sent champagne buckets flying, and Athena, a border collie whose herding instincts found a perfect outlet in the panicking party guests. "My Valentino," shrieked a woman as Apollo shook himself vigorously next to her, spraying mud across her designer dress. Athena, meanwhile, had decided that the catering staff belonged in the corner of the yard and was systematically nipping at their heels to move them where she wanted. "Control those beasts immediately." Karen's voice cut through the chaos as she marched toward the property line, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Her platinum bob remained perfectly in place despite the mayhem. A testament to industrial-strength hairspray and sheer force of will, Diane stepped out onto her porch, taking another sip of iced tea. "Sorry, Karen. They're just so excited about your party. Must have thought they were invited. This is a direct violation of what? Your made-up bylaws? The property line you pretended doesn't exist yesterday?" Diane's voice remained calm, but her eyes flashed. "My dogs are on my property now. Your guests are the ones trespassing." Indeed, in their panic to escape the enthusiastic canines, most of Karen's garden party had retreated onto Diane's land, trampling her carefully tended vegetable garden in their haste. Karen's face flushed crimson. "You've destroyed the spring sorry. Do you have any idea how important this event is to our community standing?" "About as important as my property rights, I imagine," Diane replied. A loud crash interrupted their standoff. Brutus had discovered the dessert table and was now wearing what appeared to be an upside-down tiramisu as a hat, while happily devouring a tray of petit fours. Karen's carefully constructed facade cracked. "This is sabotage. I'll sue you for every penny you have. The HOA bylaws clearly prohibit." "Sue me for what, Karen?" "For allowing my dogs onto my own property. For not stopping your guests from trespassing. Please go ahead. I'd love to have a judge review exactly how legal your HOA expansion really was." Something in Diane's tone made Karen hesitate. This wasn't following the usual script. People didn't challenge Karen Whittington. They apologized, paid their fines, and fell in line. In the momentary silence, Harold Whittington appeared at his wife's side, looking bewildered. "Karen, what on earth is happening?" "The Hendersons just drove off with the Robertsons squeezed into their backseat, and Mrs. Abernathy is threatening to resign from the garden committee." She did this." Karen pointed at Diane, voice trembling with rage. "She deliberately released those monsters to ruin everything." Harold looked from his apoplectic wife to the chaotic scene, then to Diane standing calmly on her porch. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside," he suggested, taking Karen's elbow. "The situation seems to have gotten out of hand." "Out of hand?" It's a disaster. I don't want those animals destroyed and her property seized for HOA violations. Harold's grip on Karen's arm tightened slightly. Inside deer. Now. As they turned to leave, Karen shot one last venomous glare at Diane. This isn't over, she hissed. Not by a long shot. Diane whistled for her dogs, who came bounding back to her side, Brutus still trailing the garden hose like a victory trophy. I'm counting on it, she replied softly, scratching behind Apollo's ears. We're just getting started. What neither woman noticed was Harold Whittington's calculating expression as he led his wife away, or the way his eyes lingered on the boundary between the two properties, measuring, assessing, and planning. By Monday morning, Karen had transformed her home office into a war room. Aerial photographs of Diane's property covered one wall, each potential violation circled in red marker. A whiteboard listed possible legal strategies. On her desk, a stack of HOA violation notices awaited delivery. The Martinez situation requires immediate and decisive action, Karen told her assembled advisory committee. 5 Hillcrest Valley residents whose loyalty had been secured through various social favors. She's undermined not just the spring soiree, but the very authority of our HOA. My cousin is a health inspector, offered Tricia Newberry, eager as always for Karen's approval. Perhaps we could report her for unsanitary agricultural conditions? Karen's smile was sharp, already filed yesterday. Along with noise complaints, business operation without proper permits, and excessive water usage reports. What about the fence dispute? Asked George Hamilton, a retired attorney whose primary contribution to the HOA was reviewing Karen's more questionable legal maneuvers. We'll proceed with the lawsuit, Karen declared. The boundary survey clearly shows her fence encroaches on HOA common land by 3 inches on the western edge. What Karen didn't mention was that the common land in question existed only in the new boundary map she had commissioned, one that conveniently redrew property lines in the HOA's favor. As her minions nodded approvingly, Harold appeared in the doorway. A word, Karen? In their bedroom, Harold's expression was uncharacteristically serious. I've been looking into this HOA expansion you engineered. Karen waved dismissively. All perfectly legal. The commissioners were missiled, Harold finished. I spoke with Jim Harrison at the county office this morning. The documentation you submitted wasn't entirely truthful, was it? I simplified some technical aspects. You falsified boundary documents, Harold said flatly, and you used my company's political connections to push it through without proper review. Karen's eyes narrowed. Everything I've done is to protect Hillcrest Valley's property values. Your property values. By harassing our neighbors, by turning our home into HOA headquarters. Harold gestured toward the war room. This has gone beyond maintaining community standards, Karen. That woman deliberately humiliated me in front of everyone who matters in this community. Because you tried to take over her land, Harold pointed out. I checked the property records, Karen. The Martinez Ranch has never been part of Hillcrest Valley. Your expanded jurisdiction wouldn't hold up in any court. So you're taking her side? Karen's voice rose dangerously. Harold sighed. I'm trying to prevent a lawsuit that could expose not just HOA overreach, but potentially fraudulent activity. Activity tied to my name and my company. Fine, Karen snapped. I'll handle this my way. That's what I'm afraid of, Harold muttered as she stormed out. Across the property line, Diane was facing her own problems. Her mailbox overflowed with official notices, not just from the HOA, but from county departments she'd never dealt with before. Her phone rang constantly with anonymous complaints. Delivery trucks suddenly couldn't find her address, and her internet service mysteriously failed. She's got connections, her neighbor to the south, an elderly rancher named Roy, told her when she stopped by to borrow his phone. Karen Whittington doesn't fight fair, never has. When she wanted to expand the HOA last year, those who opposed her found themselves with tax audits, built-in code violations, even problems with their employers. So what should I do? Give up my property rights? Diane asked. Roy chuckled. Darlin', I've been fighting rich folks trying to take my land for 40 years. The trick isn't matching their resources, it's finding their weakness. And Karen's weakness. Her reputation, Roy said simply. Everything she does is about how others see her. The parties, the rules, the power plays, it's all to maintain her image as Hillcrest Valley royalty. Diane thought about this as she drove home, formulating a plan that would hit Karen where it hurt most, not her wallet or her authority, but her carefully cultivated social standing. She pulled into her driveway to find a tow truck attempting to remove her barn renovation supplies from her front yard. HOA violation, the driver explained, showing her papers with Karen's signature. No construction materials visible from the street. Diane calmly took out her phone and began recording. This is private property outside HOA jurisdiction. You're committing theft and I'm calling the sheriff. The driver hesitated, looking at the papers again. Mrs. Whittington said this was authorized, he said, less certain now. Exclusive community or suburban dictatorship? Homeowners speak out against controversial HOA practices. The headline of the local newspaper's website glared from Karen's iPad screen, accompanied by a photo of a tearful elderly woman standing beside a pink mailbox with a violation notice taped to it. Mrs. Abernathy's daughter has cancer, the caption read. The pink mailbox was to show support for breast cancer awareness, but Hillcrest Valley HOA fined her $100 per day until she removed it. Karen's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. This is outrageous. Pamela Abernathy never said anything about cancer, and mailbox regulations have been in place for years. Harold glanced at the article over her shoulder. There's more. Keep scrolling. Page after page of testimonials followed. Former Hillcrest Valley residents described being hounded out of their homes over minor infractions. Current residents shared anonymous stories of intimidation and selective enforcement. And through it all ran one common thread: Karen Whittington, the HOA queen who ruled with an iron fist. Who did this? Karen whispered, her voice trembling. Who spoke to this reporter? The doorbell rang before Harold could answer. Karen opened the door to find the regular courier holding a thick stack of mail. Busy day at the Whittington house, he commented cheerfully. Never delivered so many certified letters here before. Inside the envelopes, Karen found notifications of formal complaints filed with regulatory agencies, ethics committees, and professional organizations. Homeowners were challenging HOA rulings. The county commissioner's office was reviewing the boundary extension. The real estate licensing board was investigating potential misrepresentation in HOA jurisdiction claims. This is her, Karen hissed, fingers crumpling the papers. That Martinez woman is behind all of this. Harold removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Karen, these complaints aren't coming from one person. The newspaper interviewed at least 15 current and former residents. She must have coordinated it, some sort of smear campaign. Or perhaps, Harold suggested carefully, people have simply been waiting for someone to stand up to you. Karen's phone chimed with a social media alert. With shaking fingers, she opened the Hillcrest Valley Community Forum to find her name trending in dozens of posts. Someone had created a Hillcrest HOA horror stories thread, and residents were adding to it by the minute. Worse, pictures from the ruined spring story had appeared, but not the elegant tablescape photos Karen had planned to share. Instead, there was Bruce wearing tiramisu, Apollo shaking mud onto screaming guests, and most devastatingly, a sequence showing Karen herself red-faced and shouting while Diane Martinez stood calmly on her porch. The comments were merciless. Queen Karen finally met her match. Those dogs are community heroes. Martinez for HOA president. Karen's phone began ringing, the garden club chairwoman and the women's league coordinator, followed by the private school where Karen sat on the board of trustees, all expressing concerns about this situation, all suggesting she might step back from her leadership roles until things settled down. They can't do this to me, Karen whispered, staring at the devices delivering her social destruction in real time. I built this community. I maintained standards when no one else would. Harold's expression softened slightly. You became exactly what you always hated, Karen. Someone who uses power to make others feel small. That's not true. I was protecting our investment, our lifestyle. By terrorizing our neighbors, by falsifying documents, by sending tow trucks to steal private property. Harold shook his head. This was never about property values. This was about control. Outside, a small crowd had gathered at the end of their driveway. Residents with signs reading HOA reform no and no taxation, without ostentation, were being interviewed by a local TV news crew. Karen watched through the window, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. And somewhere across the property line, she was certain Diane Martinez was watching too, perhaps with those monstrous dogs at her side, satisfied with the destruction she had unleashed. So that's it, Karen asked hollowly. She wins? Harold studied his wife's face, seeing past the anger to the fear beneath. That depends, he said quietly, on what winning means to you. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m. at the Hillcrest Valley Clubhouse. By 6:15, the parking lot was full. By 6:30, every seat in the meeting room was taken, with residents standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Karen arrived precisely at 6:55, flanked by her loyal advisory committee. She wore her power suit, navy blue with crisp lines, and carried her signature clipboard. But her usual confident stride faltered when she saw the crowd. These weren't the typical meeting attendees, the 24 regulars who rubber-stamped her agenda items before heading to the complimentary wine and cheese. Tonight, nearly every household in Hillcrest Valley was represented, their faces set with determination. And seated in the front row, inexplicably, was Diane Martinez. "What is she doing here?" Karen hissed to George Hamilton. "She's not even a member." "Actually," Board Treasurer Frank Wilson interjected, having overheard, "Ms. Martinez was invited as an interested party given that several agenda items concern her property." "By whom?" Karen demanded. "By me," Frank replied calmly. "As acting board president, I have that authority." Karen's clipboard nearly slipped from her fingers. "Acting president? I'm the president." "Perhaps we should start the meeting," Frank suggested, gesturing toward the podium. In a daze, Karen took her usual place at the center of the board table, only to find her nameplate missing. In its place was a simple card reading Karen Whittington, board member. Frank Wilson called the meeting to order, his normally timid voice uncharacteristically firm. "Before we address tonight's agenda, I must inform the community that earlier today the board of directors held an emergency session and voted on a leadership reorganization." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Due to concerns about potential procedural irregularities and governance issues, I have assumed the role of acting president, with Barbara Chen as acting vice president, effective immediately." Karen shot to her feet. "This is completely irregular. Emergency sessions require 48-hour notice to all board members." "Notice was sent to your official HOA email yesterday morning," Frank replied, sliding a printed copy toward her. "We received your automated out-of-office response." Karen stared at the email. She had indeed set an auto-response to buy time while she dealt with the social media crisis without HOA matters intruding. "The first item on tonight's agenda," Frank continued, "is a review of the HOA boundary extension passed last year, which incorporated several previously independent properties into our jurisdiction." A county official was called forward, displaying maps on the projection screen. "Our office has conducted a review of the documentation submitted for the boundary change," he explained. "We've identified several discrepancies between the application materials and the actual property records." In plain English, Barbara Chen translated for the crowd, the HOA's expansion was based on incorrect information. The properties in question, including Ms. Martinez's ranch, were never legally brought under HOA authority. The room erupted. Homeowners turned to each other in confusion and anger. Several shouted questions at Karen, who sat frozen in her seat. "Order, please," Frank called, banging the gavel. "The board proposes an immediate resolution to formally recognize the correct boundaries and withdraw any pending enforcement actions against properties incorrectly claimed to be within our jurisdiction." "He can't do this," Karen finally found her voice. "Those expansion plans were approved by this very board. Based on information you provided," Barbara Chen pointed out, "information we now know was inaccurate at best, deliberately misleading at worst." The vote was called. The motion passed unanimously, with only Karen abstaining. "The next item," Frank announced, "addresses a petition signed by 178 Hillcrest Valley households, calling for a comprehensive review of all HOA rules and enforcement procedures with the goal of simplifying regulations and establishing a more transparent violation process." This time, Karen didn't bother to object. She watched in stunned silence as 6 years of carefully constructed control mechanisms were dismantled in a single evening. The meeting continued with motion after motion. A freeze on violation fines pending review, the dissolution of her advisory committee, the scheduling of a special election for all board positions. 3 hours later, as the meeting finally adjourned, Karen remained seated while residents filed out, many stopping to speak with Diane Martinez, who received their attention with gracious smiles. "Why is everyone acting like she's the hero?" Karen asked Harold, who had slipped into the back of the meeting halfway through. "She destroyed my reputation, my position, everything I built." 2 weeks after the HOA revolution, Karen sat alone in her garden, listlessly deadheading roses. The once immaculate backyard showed signs of neglect, weeds sprouting between pavers, unswept leaves gathering in corners. She barely left the house since the meeting. Her social invitations had evaporated. Her calls went unreturned. Harold was traveling again, this time suggesting she might take some time to reflect rather than accompanying him as she usually did. The sound of a lawnmower starting up next door drew her attention to the Martinez property. Diane was visible in the distance, working on what appeared to be an expanded vegetable garden. One of her monstrous dogs, the border collie, raced along the fence line, chasing butterflies. Karen watched with a mixture of resentment and grudging admiration. Diane had accomplished in 2 weeks what no one else had managed in 6 years. She'd broken Karen's hold on Hillcrest Valley without ever becoming a member of the community. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Karen considered ignoring it. Another reporter, perhaps, or worse, a process server with yet another complaint. But something drove her to answer. On her doorstep stood Pamela Abernethy, the woman with the pink mailbox from the newspaper article. "Mrs. Abernethy," Karen said stiffly, "if you come about the mailbox, the fines have been rescinded. The board sent notices to everyone." Actually, the older woman replied, "I come about you." She held out a covered dish. "Blueberry cobbler, my mother's recipe." Karen blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." "May I come in?" Seated in Karen's kitchen, Mrs. Abernethy didn't mince words. "You've made plenty of enemies in this neighborhood, Karen Whittington, myself included. Then why are you here?" "Because I know what it's like to become the person everyone avoids. After my husband died, people didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. They stopped inviting me places. Eventually, they stopped seeing me altogether." She pushed the cobbler toward Karen. "No one should sit alone with their regrets forever." "I was trying to maintain standards," Karen said defensively. "The rules were for everyone's benefit." "Were they, or were they a way for you to feel in control?" Mrs. Abernathy's expression was knowing. When life gets uncertain, some people turn to religion, some to wine. You turn to rules and power. Karen opened her mouth to argue and closed it again. "The reorganized HOA is having a community meeting this Saturday," Mrs. Abernathy continued. "They're forming committees to review and simplify the regulations. They need people who understand the existing rules." "They don't want me there," Karen scoffed. "I'm the villain in this story, remember?" "Right now, yes, but stories can change." The older woman stood to leave. "Think about it, and eat that cobbler before it gets cold." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Karen picked at the dessert, her thoughts churning. Through the window, she could see Diane Martinez still working in her garden, now joined by several Hillcrest Valley residents who appeared to be helping plant new rows. Karen's phone pinged with an email alert. The new HOA board had sent out committee sign-up forms for Saturday's meeting. Without really knowing why, Karen found herself opening the attachment. The next morning brought another unexpected visitor. Harold returned early from his business trip. "I spoke with Frank Wilson yesterday," he said over breakfast. "The board is making good progress reorganizing. More community involvement than they've seen in years, apparently." Karen nodded slightly. "I received the committee sign-up forms." "And?" Harold studied her face carefully. "And I'm considering the landscaping and common areas committee," she admitted. "They need someone who knows which plants require minimal maintenance while providing year-round color." A small smile tugged at Harold's lips. "They certainly do." "Don't look so satisfied," Karen warned. "I haven't decided yet. What's holding you back?" Karen gestured vaguely toward the Martinez property. "Her. Everyone. What they must think of me now." Harold considered this. "When I first met you, you told me you grew up in a neighborhood where appearances were everything, where your family never quite measured up to the neighbors' standards." Karen stiffened. "That has nothing to do with this, doesn't it? You created rules that gave you control over exactly the things you were once judged for: lawns, exteriors, aesthetics." "That's amateur psychology, Harold." "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but wouldn't it be interesting if you could use all that organizational energy to build something, rather than police it?" Later that afternoon, Karen found herself walking along the property line between her